Hey, Justin Bruzzo here, and today I want to talk about the iPhone 12 Pro Max. I've had this phone for about a month now, and you'll probably see this theme on my other videos where I really don't like to say anything or even see first impressions of something until I've used it for a while. I don't think it's fair to use something for a day or two and then come out and say, oh, this is great and this is bad. I find that often my first impressions are not always the same as they are a few weeks later. So now that I've had this phone for a month, I wanted to kind of dig through all the major things to determine whether or not is it worth upgrading to this phone. And I think it depends on what type of person you are, but in short, we'll kind of break down into a few different categories and see if this is the right upgrade for you. I'm going to start with some of the more simple things and then move on to some things that require a little more explanation. And I have put chapter markers in, so if you want to just jump to something that interests you, you can feel free to skip to that. The first thing I want to talk about is battery life. The iPhone 12 Pro Max, being the larger phone, does have a bigger battery, and it does last, for me, all day. I would say I probably use my phone more than the average person uses it. I use it for business during the day. I'm on it a lot at night, early in the morning, and you know, my usage time might average 3 to 4 hours a day. If for any reason I'm commuting and I'm on a train going to the city or anything like that for a few hours, then that could easily be more like 6 or 7 hours in a day. I think what's important here is for most people, if you are the type of person who charges your phone every night before you go to bed, you are never going to have an issue with this battery. And the same holds true for since I've had a large phone. My first phone was the iPhone 6 Plus, and then I went from the 6 Plus to the 7 Plus to the XS Max, XS Max, and then to the 11 Pro, and now the 12 Pro Max. And quite frankly, I don't know that any of those phones ever died in the middle of the day, assuming that it got a full charge at night. So again, maybe if you're on your phone literally for 15 hours straight, it might be a different story. But if you're coming from any of those other Max phones you already know, I do know that the battery life difference is fairly significant from the smaller versions of the phone. My wife has always had the smaller versions of all of these phones, and I find that her phone will usually be just about dead at the end of a day if she's using it a lot during the day, where mine might have, even after an 18, 19, 20-hour day, might still have about 20% left on the battery. Obviously, this is not a scientific report on the battery. I'm just telling you this is my life and how it works and fits into my routine. I have never in many years had an issue with any of my large phone batteries dying. Ergonomically speaking, this phone I really like a lot better than the past iPhones I have owned. I will say that when I went, and I don't recall which phone it was, I believe it was the Droid DNA. It could have been an HTC One. I don't remember which one came first, but I believe that was the last Android phone that I used before I went over the iPhone and I had gotten a 6 Plus. And that HTC Droid was one of my absolutely favorite phones in terms of ergonomics. It was similar in size and shape of an iPhone, except it had kind of a rounded back and it had these really great rubberized textured grips that were built into the side profile of the phone. What was awesome about that is it really gave a good, confident feel when you were holding the phone. Now, I hate using phone cases. I never used a phone case in my entire life until I got to the 6 Plus. The 6 Plus had rounded edges and they were made of aluminum. They were really slippery, and quite frankly, I was really concerned I was going to drop the phone if I didn't have a case on it that would give it a little more grip. Fast forward to the iPhone 7 and onward, this was the same until I got to the iPhone 11. On the iPhone 11 Pro Max, they turned this from aluminum, and I believe they went to a stainless steel, and it was still the same shape as the 6, 7, and 8. However, that stainless steel definitely has a much more grippy feel to it than aluminum does. And I, again, scientifically, I don't know why, I'm not a metallurgy expert, but stainless steel definitely has a little bit more grippiness. I was really excited with this phone because not only does it still have this stainless steel band, but now being squared off, it really gives me that confident feeling and grip that I'm not going to drop this through the course of a normal day. Again, if you're klutzy with your phone, keep it in a case. I've never really dropped and broken a phone ever. I'm not saying I'm special, maybe I'm just lucky. I do have Apple Care if anything were to happen, but I can tell you there's a big difference between using these phones with a case and without a case. If you're someone on a 2-year cycle or 3 or 4 years, take your phone out of your case. It's gonna feel like a brand new phone and a whole new experience. The next thing I want to move on to is 5G. Obviously, one of the big deals with these new phones is 5G, but I'm going to throw it out there. Unless you live in a city center that has, and in my case, I'm on Verizon, unless you have a certain type of 5G in your area, which for Verizon is what they call millimeter wave 5G, then you're probably going to find that 5G not only is not faster than 4G, it's actually slower in some instances. And I'll throw a few specs up on the screen just for you to see, but I did a test when 5G has gone live in my area, and when I had full 5G strength and I had full 4G strength, I actually found the 5G was slower. I was a little stunned by this, and I did do a little online research, and I know I'm not alone. I'd love to hear in the comments, what kind of speeds are you getting out of the 5G in your area? Quite frankly, if 5G is a reason you think you want to upgrade, don't. It's just not there yet. It's not going to probably be there for about another 2 to 3 years before it's really widely available. And even then, I'm not quite confident that the 5G is going to be delivering these speeds in the future that we think it is in its current incarnation. Next thing I want to talk about is the display on this phone. So the 11 Pro, one of the huge upgrades was they went to an OLED display. Now, if you've never had an OLED display, it is a complete game changer. Nothing comes close to the quality of OLED. And I know there's haters out there that'll say it has all these shortfalls, it's not as bright, it suffers from burn-in, on and on and on. But the reality is, for 90% of people, this is never gonna be an issue, and it is absolutely stunningly breathtaking when you see the contrast and how crisp and clean those colors are on an OLED display. If you're going from an 11 Pro to the 12 Pro, you're not gonna see any difference. It's basically the same display. I know they say there's some updates, but to me it looks exactly the same. I don't see any difference. If you are moving from any other phone, you will absolutely see a significant difference between, let's say, a 10 or anything prior to an iPhone 10 and then moving into an OLED. They're just an absolutely gorgeous screen. It's second to none. It's beautiful. You're gonna love it. If that's something that is intriguing to you, then yeah, you're gonna wanna upgrade because it is absolutely awesome. One of the interesting things I found with the spec sheet for the 12 Pro Max was that there was a new coating on the screen that was supposed to reduce fingerprints. I gotta say, it may be effective. Unfortunately, I don't have my old phone to compare it to, and it's not something that I necessarily noticed on my own. But after I read it, I kind of looked at my screen and I said, yeah, it doesn't look too bad, considering I'm not too neurotic about keeping the screen clean. And I know on older phones, you know, I'd have a lot of fingerprints and they would get pretty nasty over time. I definitely realized that the back of the phone really doesn't show any fingerprints at all. The sides here, these show everything, but the glass itself, I mean, you know, you'll see some fingerprints, but I think it actually does make a little bit of a difference. Of course, one of the other things when we talk about the screen and this display is the fact that they put some ceramic coating on here. Now they say that this glass is stronger than it's ever been before. Again, I'm not one who typically drops their phone. I don't keep my phone in a case. I've never broken a screen on any of my phones, so I don't know if that's important to me, but if you're outside and working in the elements, then that may be an important thing that you might want to consider when upgrading your phone, is how strong that glass is. But honestly, if you're in one of those situations where you're in a dirty job and you really need to protect your phone, obviously the best bet is going to be just get a really good case that's going to take the abuse for your day-to-day, and then that's really not going to make much of a difference anyway. One of the other things that intrigued me about this phone was this little camera right here, which is the LiDAR camera. So I think this deserves a little bit more of a discussion, and again, I'd love to hear your feedback in the comments section of what you think is going on with LiDAR. when I purchased my iPad Pro, I purchased a 2018, and I opted for that over the 2020 because they were virtually the same except for that LiDAR camera, and I really didn't see a practical application for it. Now that I've had this phone for a month, I still don't really see any practical applications for using the LiDAR. I do see that there's some 3D scanning apps, and it's kind of cool to scan something in your house, and you can rotate it around, and it's really neat. But I still just don't see a practical application. It reminds me of Bluetooth when it came out in the, I want to say like early or mid 90s. It was a really cool technology, but at the time there just weren't a lot of things that would require that short range communications. Obviously it's become huge and now it's used for everything, but back then it was really a technology that was solving a problem that didn't exist. LiDAR in terms of the phone, I believe is the same way, where it's kind of it's really good technology, it's really cool what it can do, but I don't know if there's many practical applications except for one. And I'm gonna jump into that when I talk a little bit about the camera. So I think it's important to talk a little bit about what is LiDAR. Essentially, when a camera takes a picture on your old phone, it's a two-dimensional picture. And the software, like portrait mode, for example, which Apple created, which was a really cool effect, it was able to kind of use software to identify the subject of a photo and pull it from the background. And then it would take two pictures when there was the two camera array that came out on those phones. And obviously it would take two pictures at the same time. One it would take in focus, and one it would essentially take blurry. And what would happen is it could pull you, the subject, from the background, keep you sharp, and then have the natural blur of the camera as the background. And it worked pretty good. It didn't work all the time. You really had to have the right lighting. A lot of times the edges of your hair might be a little screwed up. Objects might be screwed up, especially if it was something like glass that was transparent. There were a lot of little flaws, but it was really cool in concept. What LiDAR does is it actually has that ability to make a 3D image in the sense that the camera and the phone can now use the data from the LiDAR and know for certain where you are in the photo versus your background, where before it was guessing. Now it knows for sure. So I think one of the most practical applications of the LiDAR technology right now in this phone and in this little lens is to go with these three lenses and really make for an awesome camera. Whether it's for focusing, we're already seeing some really cool LiDAR technology for some of the cinema cameras to do autofocus on those. And of course, for any of this depth of field and perception. You know, software by itself with a traditional camera, it doesn't know if an object is really close in the mid-range or far away. It just can't see that. It just sees a flat 2D image. But now with this LiDAR technology, we can map the data of that image into the picture itself and then do all sorts of really cool stuff. Now, I think that we're just seeing this in the infancy stage, and I honestly don't know how much the LiDAR is playing into the images that the camera captures right now, if any. But if there is any area on a phone where LiDAR is going to make a significant and technological evolutionary leap in quality, it's going to be with the way it processes photos and videos with that data attached to it. You have anything less than an iPhone 11. So if you've got a 10 or anything prior to that, the 11 was a significant increase in quality. You had the wide-angle lens, you had a 3-lens array, which allowed the camera to do a lot of really cool things. And the picture quality was really, really fascinating. It was much, much better, especially in low light. And now, again, I'm not comparing this to the Google phones or Android phones. I know there's some really respectable cameras out there. I know some of them are rated better than the iPhone. I'm just speaking from people coming from an older iPhone to a newer iPhone. The camera in the 11 is significantly better all around than the camera that was in the 10 or any of the phones prior to that Apple makes. This, I was really shocked. It actually takes it a whole nother level again. The low light performance is way better. The optical image stabilization is fantastic. Even in some video clips that I shot, I was surprised at how good it worked. I recently purchased a DJI Osmo 4 to go along with this camera, and quite frankly, the the image stabilization is so good in this, especially in the video mode, that I don't even know how often I'm gonna bother taking the Osmo out. And you can see in these clips, it works well. Now, it's not perfect, and keep in mind in these clips, I'm walking, I'm not trying to be conscientious about keeping it as smooth as possible. It was just a late night, was having fun, just got my new camera and wanted to see what it looked like with a cityscape in the background, and this is what we got. One of the other things that Apple has now added that people have been asking for a long time is a RAW format. And what that means is a format where there is no image processing. It seems like with every iteration of every phone, there's always some level of controversy regarding something that the software is doing to change the image. I remember, I think it was the iPhone 11, people's faces look too smooth. Maybe the highlights are too bright or shadows are too dark, or the HDR is making everything look a little washed out. I mean, there's all these situations where sometimes we just don't like what the software is doing and we want to take that control back, especially as photographers. If you're into photography and videography, the more control you have, the better. So Apple RAWs just came out, so I honestly have not had a long time. The only thing I will say on my initial impressions of Apple RAW, I did find some behaviors that were much different than I expected. Specifically, I'll show you these few pictures. When adjusting highlights and shadows, I find the highlights hit this critical point where they actually turn gray. And then as you make them brighter and brighter, they actually come back and they're no longer gray, and then they're just brighter. I'm guessing this has something to do with how the images are layered. I'm sure it's something that's going to become much more of an issue as people play with this more and more, and I'm guessing it's just some type of weird software thing that'll eventually get fixed, or it's just some limitation of how it stacks the photos, especially in a dark scene. The iPhone will take many, many pictures and combine the qualities of each one of those pictures to give you the best possible picture. And I don't know offhand, because I haven't had a lot of experience with it, which is why I don't like to talk about these things, but I don't have a lot of experience with how exactly that works with image stacking in regards to editing a RAW photo. But just keep that in mind. It's not going to be exactly the same as a RAW photo from a DSLR in Photoshop. There's going to be some weird behavior differences. In terms of overall performance, running iOS 14 on this phone, it runs great. Quite frankly, I don't know that I would notice a difference between a 10, an 11, and a 12. They all run great and smooth. I don't know if any of those phones have got to a critical tipping point where the iOS 15 or 16 is really gonna make it laggy or not as good or as smooth as you're used to. I mean, the performance on this phone is absolutely phenomenal. Again, if you're running an iPhone 8, with iOS 14, going to this 12 is going to be a significant difference. I mean, just things about swiping side to side, up and down, moving between apps, it is all just perfectly fluid and perfectly smooth, and there's never any lag. I never have any delays. It's just, everything works great. There are a few bugs I've experienced. The first is with the 4G connection. I did find in the first week I had the phone, I was traveling in New Hampshire, and I found that that I was losing signal. In areas where my wife would have 4 bars of 4G, I would go from 4 to nothing, and I would not get it back unless I just tapped into airplane mode, took airplane mode back off, and then I'd get my signal again. It reminds me of phones like 6 or 7 years ago. I can't remember the last time I had to start toggling airplane mode just to get my signal to come back. So that was kind of weird, and it happened throughout the course of that week, and there's been obviously many updates in the past month to iOS 14, and I believe they may have fixed the problem, but I don't know if it was a geographic issue or if it had something to do with the software. I do know when I Googled it, I did find other people on the Apple forum that were having issues with their connections dropping out. It's been good for the last few weeks. I haven't had that issue, or at least I've not noticed that happening. So that's good news. Qi charger, QI, however you pronounce it. If you use one of those charging pads that's generic, there are tendencies for it to just not charge at all, regardless of where you place it on the charging mat. The solution, unfortunately, is a reboot. This has only happened to me about 2 times in the past month that I've owned the phone, and rebooting it has fixed the problem. But again, when I had this issue and I Googled it, I did find some pretty lengthy threads on the Apple forum where people are having issues daily where they'd get one night it would charge and then the next night it wouldn't. They'd have to reboot to get that wireless connection to reestablish between the charger and the phone. Again, I'm assuming this is some type of software issue and not a hardware issue. And considering the variance of people who have no issues and people like me who've just had it happen once or twice versus people who are having it happen every single day, I don't know. I don't know, maybe if there's a different app or something happening, data being carried over from an old phone. I don't know what the variables could be that would cause that to happen when the hardware is identical. But it is something you should be aware of, and hopefully it's not something you'll have an issue with, but if you do, just remember that is a known issue right now. Is it worth an upgrade? That's the real question we're asking. If you have an 11 Pro right now, this is probably not worth the upgrade. The only reason it would be worth the upgrade is if you are a really passionate photographer and you take a lot of pictures or video, and that's something that is really important to you. This is just a fantastic video and camera system, and you will not be disappointed moving from the 11 Pro to the 12 Pro. It is a significant update, especially with that low light photography and low light video. I was really impressed with the low light video because that always tends to be a more noisy and grainy than photos tend to be in any type of night mode situation with these cell phones. So if that's something you're into, it's definitely worth upgrading. If you're on a XS Max and you're looking for improved battery life or smoother performance or faster performance, probably not really worth the upgrade. You might be better off hanging on to your phone for another year. If you have anything older, if you're moving from an iPhone 7 and iPhone 8, if you're happy with everything the way it's running, then of course keep your phone, save your money. But if you're having any issues or any doubt whatsoever that your phone's not running as good as it should, then I would definitely make the jump. It's just, you're not going to be disappointed. It's going to be a huge leap forward in terms of performance all around, in terms of the fluidity of the software, in terms of the battery life, in terms of the camera performance, in terms of the screen quality. I mean, just about everything, if you're moving from an iPhone 8, is going to be way better on the iPhone 12. So definitely something to consider. So that concludes my kind of long-term 30-day review on using this phone on a daily basis all day long, and I'm obviously going to enjoy it for another year at least until the next model comes out. But I would love to hear, how's it working out for you? You having any bugs? Or also, what do you think? Are you going to upgrade? Or are you happy with the phone you have? Let me know in the comments below, and if you like the video, please subscribe, and thanks for watching.